All right, everyone. We're live. Thanks for joining us on the January 25th live stream. This one will be an interesting episode as we have two guests, which is a first for us. We have Charles already on, and we'll have Joe Camel coming on. He said he's running a little bit late, but he'll be joining us pretty soon. So. You'll see on the screen, this is new. I have my link for my Twitter and for Blue Sky. And just a reminder to like, share, and comment and subscribe if you like this content. But let me, without further ado, bring everyone back in. All right, so on the stage with me, we have Steve-O, Ook, Blarg, and John, our regulars, plus Charles, our guest. Hello, everyone. How's everyone doing?
Hey, all.
Hey, everybody.
Good. Thanks for asking.
Good. The cat tried to kill me.
Billy.
No,
Another
ended
beautiful
up.
week in paradise.
He knocked my foot out from underneath me as I was walking past the stairs, and I
Oh,
fell over.
Yeah,
So I turned
everyone
myself
knows
so-
cats are evil.
and I got
turned
hit
myself
up
Watch
running
a
around.
video.
Yeah, I turned
Of,
myself so I
what
wouldn't
they do.
hit my spine, and I hit my. I feel like I've been hit across the side by a baseball bat. I ended up hitting the stairs on my side. But yeah, he's living up
And
to his name, Spike.
You're definitely not sure it isn't Crystal who's just blaming it on the cat?
Yeah.
No, I've got more.
Okay.
I did, yeah. Actually,
And
might
it's
show
not
them.
quite cats, but I know Charles is kind of has some kids to look out for. How old are your kids, Charles?
4 and 6. So they're
Oh,
little-
wow.
oh,
two little
ouch,
girls.
Wow.
Yeah.
ouch.
Yeah. So
It's not a bad age because they're walking and stuff.
yeah, they can they can mostly take care of themselves.
Yeah.
Good,
So-
good.
Yeah.
Girls
I
are-
can
They,
leave- I can
girls
leave
are
them-
hard.
they seem to have started turning into humans around that age.
Yeah, the 6-year-old has definitely come online. The 4.5-year-old probably will deal with some lifelong trauma from us expecting her to act like a 6-year-old. So
Oh.
Oh, no.
just the nature of the beast when you have multiple kids and very little
Yeah.
time.
At least with boys, you can give them a hammer and tell them to go play. Girls, you can't do that. You mean other parents didn't do that?
Oh,
That's what I got.
I think that's the consensus I hear from my sisters. Yeah. For us,
Well, Ook, we are in the United States, so they just get a gun.
That's true.
there you
Yeah.
go. Yeah. Start them out young with the Nerf guns and progress them slowly until they're institutionalized.
That's how it usually goes.
I mean, I got mine first gun when I was, I think, 4.5.
Oh, Red
So-
Rider.
No,
Well,
no,
because you put your eye out with those.
22 pump. Oh, 22 pump action.
Mm.
Oh, nice.
But the joys of growing up in the bush, mind you, back then Australia didn't have gun law. Or well, we did, but no one bothered with them. I think Blarg would have been the same being up north.
Yeah, I as a kid, I once got to play around with an 8mm rifle while the parents were away. Wasn't a very smart move.
No goats killed.
No, pretty damn close to getting myself killed though.
Yeah.
I
I mean-
managed to clip the side of my head with a ricochet.
Oh,
Oh wow,
Yeah. You
that's
just
rough.
go, at that point, probably should stop doing the stupid shit.
That makes
The old
sense.
man and my godfather managed to get hold for my 8th birthday, an ex-military Bren, and I discovered that the legend you can cut down a tree with a Bren gun a gum tree with a bread gun is true.
Oh boy.
That was fun.
I can
And
imagine.
pigs were good. Leave a whole lot of
Well, there
mangoes
was
out
the
for the
guy.
pigs.
There was the guy who managed to cut down one of those. What do you call the giant cactuses down in Arizona? With a shotgun, then had the cactus promptly
Oh,
fall on top of him and squash him dead.
I did hear about that. So he
It's,
got the
some
Darwin
good
Award,
work.
right?
Yeah.
Oh well, yes, and having a cactus fall on top of you is a pretty nasty way to go. Really, that's
I don't want to think
right up
about
there.
that.
Yeah.
That's, yeah, just a
By the
regular
way,
tree's bad.
yeah.
Fucking cactus.
So Side Boob said need 22 for all those deadly spiders down there, but I wanted to point out his profile picture.
Yes, of the break dancer.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah,
That woman could create world peace, and that dance will be the opening
Yeah.
line.
That would be what you
Will you
Her
tell her?
obituary.
Will you tell her about suing the Aborigines? Blood or blood?
Yeah. I
Oh,
think I heard that.
she's claimed the kangaroo dance is her intellectual property, and you go, oh, you really should mention that to a few 100,000 original residents who may have got there a bit earlier than yourself.
Hmm.
Just an absolute shocker.
Yeah.
She's just a terrible person, however you look at it.
Yeah.
Not just a
Yeah.
terrible dancer.
All right, so let's get going. For those of you in the chats, the topic today is going to be on the death penalty. And this originally came from, let me just put this up, a Twitter discussion that, so Joe was the one who kind of first started it. And so that's why he wanted to talk to Charles. But it was this, when the idea of public execution for immigrants, and then, people calling for public execution of these, admittedly horrible people who groomed and raped their adopted kids. And so Joe had kind of noted that, it seems like at the time there was kind of lots of talks about public executions. And then Charles replied about how executions are important. And I had entered a conversation just saying that for executions, there's a deterrence and retribution. And at the time, I was talking about public executions. So earlier this month, when we first talked to Charles, we kind of started talking a little bit about it, and we got a bit sidetracked on kind of different topics. So we had asked him to come back and finish actually discussing the death penalty. And I say death penalty because I don't think it makes sense to talk about public executions because, at least for the foreseeable future, we shouldn't be having public executions. Although, as I say it, I'm thinking, okay, who knows what's going to happen in the next 4 years. But so we will keep it to discussing the death penalty. And since we have a couple Aussies and a Brit, we can kind of pull them in to sort of give us a comparison to how things are over there. Basically, those countries have abolished the death penalty, as I understood it, and I think most countries have. But
57 years. We haven't had the death penalty for 57 years, and our military hasn't had it since before World War One. It took the Brits killing or executing pretty much an Australian legend, Breaker Morant, and the Australian Army just went, fuck this, we're not letting anyone kill our soldiers. They're all volunteers. They're not allowed to, no, fuck it. So
Yeah,
Yeah.
and so the point I was raising was kind of the issue of these executions or death penalty, because even though ideally we want justice to get applied judiciously, that always isn't the case. It's not very practical to expect that we're going to see uh, completely fair applications of law. And we definitely know that, and I brought up the Emmett Till mostly for the public execution part, but, there are definitely actual legal death penalty executions where we find out after the fact that those people are innocent. And certainly there are many people who are released from on death row because of things like the shoot, I forget the name.
The Innocence Project.
Yeah, the Innocence Project. Thank you. Yeah, and there's quite a few, and so this is where Charles responded, and we can kind of jump off from here and have Charles take over. But he kind of separated the application of justice and the corruption of the institution. So Charles, I think what you're trying to say is that the fact that there is corruption of the institution that causes death penalty to be misapplied, you're saying that that shouldn't be an argument against the death penalty. Am I getting that right?
So I'm not saying it shouldn't be an argument against the death penalty. I think that everyone should bring all available arguments, and then we should, or ideas, and then we should discuss the merits of those ideas and maybe why they should or should not apply, or do not apply, or why we think that. And so I think it's important to separate concerns for sure, because otherwise ideas get conflated and confused. And so in this particular instance, where you're talking about false negatives and false positives, and ultimately expressing the idea of how to deal with or how to manage risk assessment, where people who were innocent were convicted and then killed by the death penalty. In my version of how I believe things have to work, or how things should work, I think that the death penalty is a good tool to use. So hold on one sec, guys.
Good in what way? What
I think you have
defines
to
it,
step
in your
away.
opinion, as being good?
I'm sorry about that. Got an intrusion from the
No worries.
Can
I'm
you
sorry.
repeat, Blarg?
Sorry. So I was saying, what do you define as good? In what way is it good to have the death penalty
Sure. So
specifically?
so the way that I define good in like this in this context would be what serves the public trust, like what builds community, what either builds community or either builds trust or restores the public trust. So you could say what is good for those things is good, maybe objectively, towards the goal of the survival of our species.
How does the death penalty?
Yeah, based on that metric, I don't see how you connect that to
how does the death penalty deliver that in a way that's over and above having the person locked up for all time?
Sure. Yeah. Well, so having someone locked up for all time has like second order and third order consequences, right? So it's not, there's a continuing burden on the community for that. And so, we could go down that path, but I think the question, I think the underlying question is probably the more important one to start with, which is like, why, like what needs to happen with these people and why? And so we can use the case of the two gay dads who, or whatever word you want to use, homosexual dads that were molesting and then it sounds like even farming out these two little boys. There's, and I said before, like we would talk a little bit about the neuroscience behind why I would choose like a permanent removal from the community versus like an imprisonment. So
Well, just on the practical side,
But-
where would we permanently remove these people, U.S. citizens?
No, he's talking about death.
yeah, so
Oh, I thought you were talking about exile because you were talking about that at one
No.
point.
so I think that all three of these satisfy the idea of removing someone from society in a way, in the sense that, like, okay, well, if you have life in prison, you have a removal of these people from the community, right? If you have exile, you again have the permanent removal, or theoretically the permanent removal. And then if you have the death penalty, then you certainly have the removal of the what I'm going to call the threat of these individuals from the community. And so, in my assessment, I think that the death penalty is warranted for certain behaviors where rehabilitation is not an option.
Yeah, but
What would be an
again,
example
how
of?
does-
Yeah, what would be an example of that?
Where rehabilitation is not an option. So the challenge with rehabilitation, especially in instances where we have these kinds of behaviors, right? Let's talk about we can talk about like rape, murder, child molestation, sexual assault. It's really any type of it's really not just these behaviors, but it's behavior in general when you start applying how the brain stores what are called emotional appraisals, and how we tie in memory to, I guess we'll call them like neurochemicals, right? So you could call them like dopamine drops, but it's not just dopamine, right? The idea is that when you engage a behavior that provides some sort of benefit to you, like we're going to call them good feelings just for like simple words, then you draw a correlation to that behavior that then encourages, or we could also say increases the probability that you're going to predict good future outcomes by doing it again. And so that's where, and as far as I'm aware in neuroscience, they've studied this, and there's currently no, neuroplasticity is one way that we change the wiring of the brain, but we haven't seen anything that shows that we can overwrite or override emotional appraisals to that extent.
Well, so there's two aspects. One is protecting the society, right, by keeping them from harming. And then the other is retribution. And you're just ruling out rehabilitation in this case, right?
In the case where, so the way I look at justice is it's a two-pronged system. So the more commonly like way of talking about it is called restorative justice. But I would say it comes with two prongs, which is one, you have to restore the victim to wholeness, so that they're not encouraged to go commit further crimes to restore themselves. And then two, you have to restore the public trust. And so I look at those two prongs as being important to
public trust in what?
the public trust in the foundations of civilization, of like domestication.
But how does
killing
execution
someone
do that?
do that?
Yeah, I don't.
How does killing
None of
someone...
us can set to see that. If you lock them away forever, how is the public trust not solved in that case? The public trust problem not solved.
So we could look at it a couple ways, I guess. I would say that one, that person is still having an influence in the community. So they're having an influence on the burden, right? And the burden that they present to the community. And so if I were to think, if, like, I could just take this as individually and say, like, okay, well, in the instance in where I agree to live in community, right, where we can like more easily talk about it as the social contract, where rather than just saying I'm going to kill everyone and take all their resources for myself, I choose to live in community and not do that, so that we can all prosper better together. Then I have to ask the question. Now that's a conscious awareness, right? Not everyone is consciously aware that they're actually doing that. Most people who are born into like first world countries aren't aware that that's what's actually going on because they were born into that context. But if I bring in the conscious awareness of that idea and I say, okay, this is the circumstance. The reason that you're able to live next door to someone and they don't kill you and take all your stuff is because you both have this implicit social contract. Hang on one sec. Hold on.
Try your mic now, Q.
Yeah, I think I was just
That's
a little
it.
bit further away. Yeah.
Yeah.
Just need to be closer.
Okay,
Sweet
sorry about
as.
that. Yeah, so go
no,
ahead. Sorry.
No, I think you were talking.
Okay. So I call that the implicit agreement, right? When you start talking about, you said like, well, how does it not restore the public trust? Well, it doesn't restore the public trust because when we become consciously aware that we're all operating under a social contract, then the question becomes, why should I be giving up resources, things that ultimately I'm agreeing to bring to the table in order for the benefit of all? Why would I want to give up resources to sustain the health and well-being of a person who poses a persistent and, in my opinion, unrehabilitatable or unrehabilitable? I don't know what the right word for that is, but
Well, let's
not.
say for like a violent crime, when that person becomes 80 years old, are they still they're no longer really a threat, right?
I mean, so remember, I served in law enforcement, so I saw a lot of things that may not be like they're not really thought experiments, but in reality, like, yeah, they are threats. They're threats in different ways,
So,
but yeah, they can be.
so your
Are
main
they the same
argument
as a
here,
20-year-old gang member? No, not usually.
You're-
Yeah,
But
I get your point. Blarg, go ahead.
your main argument here, Charles, is that it costs a lot of money to keep someone in jail for the rest of their life, and therefore we shouldn't be spending that money. Is that correct?
I wouldn't frame it that way. No,
That
I don't think of.
seems how you framed it. And saying that if we executed the person, we wouldn't have to spend all of that money.
So you're using terms like money, and I'm not using terms like money.
Yeah, but you're
Well, you
certainly
said
implying
resources.
money.
So what are the
What resources?
I would
Yeah.
say resources would be a better frame.
Yeah, it's still the cost and benefit analysis, though.
Ultimately, resources come down to money. If you've had anything to do with risk analysis, it all comes down to money.
I would say that money comes down to resources. So I would disagree with that premise.
You
in
measure
either
it in terms
right,
of
but
money.
in either
What
way.
resources? What resources are you talking about? People resources, physical infrastructure
Time, energy,
resources.
and effort. Yeah, money is a representation of time, energy, and effort.
Yeah, so it comes down to money. Here's the problem.
Now, I would say it comes down to time, energy, and effort, which is more important.
They ultimately equal money. At the end of the day, it equals money. The problem is that let's use your terminology, the time and resources and effort of bringing a person to execution is higher than the cost of keeping them for the rest of their life. It's not.
Yes.
You're not saving resources. You're increasing the cost.
And why?
So how
why
is
would
that
you
an
say
improvement? Because study after study after study says that it costs more to execute a person than it does to keep them for the rest of their life.
that? So
it's a well understood.
Well, I would definitely reject the idea of a well understood principle, and this is why. because when we talk about the cost of resources, that's subjective. That would apply to the systems in which you're applying the death penalty. So, of course, if we're applying like the standard, which would be that the person has to be arrested, they have to go to trial, they have to face a jury. Those things all happen regardless. So we're going to remove those costs.
Yeah.
And then we're going to say,
Fair.
okay, now under the current methodology, which I don't necessarily disagree with, we have an appeal system. And so I would argue that either way, whether you kill them or not, right, whether you apply the death penalty or you allow them to stay in prison, the appeal system still applies to them. They can appeal either way. In one way, they might be appealing the death penalty, and the other way, they would be appealing life in prison. So I'm not sure that there's any additional costs associated to that. So outside of those realms, then, it could just simply be the inefficiency of the system.
Well, no, let's actually use some examples. So a cost study for Maryland found that Maryland spent $186 million extra. This isn't just $186 million, but $186 million more than they would have otherwise spent to carry out 5 executions. Just 5.
Yeah.
You can keep a lot of people locked up for their entire life for $186 million, and that number is much larger than 5. I'll give you a quote from a fellow by the name of Sterling Godspeed, a district attorney at Warren County, New York. He said, "I think I could prove to you that I could put someone up in the Waldorf Hotel for 60 to 70 years and feed them 3 meals a day for cheaper than we can litigate a single death penalty case." It's not close. The death penalty costs way more than keeping someone in jail for the rest of their life. It's a non-starter, that argument.
I disagree. Yeah. So
people have actually done studies.
Well,
who
yes, I'll tell you why.
I have a question, Charles.
I'll explain why. So
Wait, John, let's wait for Charles's response first.
So the reason that I disagree is that because what you're discussing is the efficiency of a government system, not the idea of an institution. And when we conflate problems, right, when we start talking about the idea of the death penalty and why I believe it's it can provide good outcomes, when you bring in a secondary issue, which is that the state of Maryland has an inefficient government system and it doesn't know how to, it's not properly incentivized to operate efficiently, then we have to have those discussions separately. And then we can say, well, if it's always true that all governments will always spend more money killing someone who needs to be removed rather than placing them in a penitentiary for a life sentence, then we can have that discussion. But until that's always true, we're only talking about the institution of the death penalty.
No, the problem is you've never demonstrated it's ever possible for it to be cheaper to bring a person to the death penalty.
I wouldn't say you've demonstrated that it's always true.
We've demonstrated that there isn't any known cases where it's cheaper.
Well, so
if there are no known cases, but you're claiming that it should exist,
sure,
then until you can demonstrate that it does exist, and look, I can come up with a way for it to exist. Let's just get rid of all of the extra appeals that a person on death penalty has, and then just execute them that way. That then means that we are happy with the idea of killing more innocent people, because that's the reason. It's not inefficiencies. It is to do with the fact that nobody wants to be going and no one wants to be going and executing an innocent person, so they give them more opportunities. You can make it the same price. You just take away the thing and accept, we're going to kill more innocent people. So it doesn't do that. And it also doesn't reduce the prevalence of crimes from other people. So it doesn't achieve any of the possible goals that you put out on the table.
I'm not
You
sure
just
that
ignore
that's.
those.
I'm not sure that that's true. So the argument that you made was that
Can
it's
can I
very.
just let John? Can you?
I'm
So
sorry.
for this current discussion, so I think the primary topic is this the idea of kind of the practical aspect and kind of the aspirational aspect. But before we get into that, John, what was your question?
Well, okay, so I guess since you made this about the most efficient use of resources,
I don't know that I
time,
made it about
energy,
that.
effort. What's that?
Yeah, I'm not sure that I made it about that, but
Well,
that's.
is it your position that the death penalty is a more efficient use of social resource?
I would say that's like correlated, but not causal. Sure.
Then let's talk about the causal, because
Yes.
at the end of the day, you can claim correlation between any two things, I suppose, but I'm a little confused as to how you can conclude that societies are better off with a death penalty if you haven't any succinct examples where the death penalty has resulted in a net positive for the society as a whole. You talked like a second ago. You said, "Well, you haven't established this and you haven't established that." So let's
Sure.
establish some things.
Sure.
Let's actually establish concrete examples that you have where we're able to show the causation of a society being better off because of the death penalty.
So
So
before you answer, Charles, let me just add in Joe. Joe just joined us. Hey, Joe, welcome.
Joe?
We're
G'day,
we're
Connor.
we're kind of in the thick of things, but this is the first time you've actually met, right, Joe and Charles?
Yeah, me and Joe go back and forth on X all the time, so that's fun.
I'm sure. So, Joe, I think you heard part of John's response. So, with that, Charles, uh, do you need John to repeat the question?
Well, so I think the challenge becomes that so initially I told you Q when I agreed to come on that the what I was willing to discuss was the idea of the ethics behind the death penalty and why I thought that it's necessary. And the question that has been presented is why not use an alternative option? And I think the problem is this is that when we're dealing with the ethics of the death penalty versus why not use an alternative option, then it brings in this secondary question of efficiency. And I think that clouds the discussion. It adds a layer that stops us from talking about the ethics of killing other human beings as a form of justice, which I think is a much safer space and clearer space than. And then I guess you could ask the question like, well, do the ethics change when there is an alternative, like a reasonable alternative that accomplishes the same goal? And then having a discussion about efficiency and the ethics and morality of efficiency would be relevant, in my opinion.
Well, so I have 2 points, and before I can turn it over to Joe. One is I don't think you can divorce yourself from the reality, the practical reality. It does affect how you might think the ethics of things. Like, well, if we could just revive someone who's completely dead, if we had a technology, then the moral aspect of murder, changes significantly. So I think you can't just divorce yourself. And secondly, I know this is something that you had kind of brought up at the beginning, that you're in a sense, talking about, being able to discuss this, right? I don't think you're concerned as much with sort of the current issues with death penalty, things like, Emmett Till getting, publicly executed. Those aren't the, and also kind of the practical aspect. You kind of want to talk about, just at kind of like an abstract level of justice and death penalty. Is that right?
I think it's easier to separate concerns, because when we start bringing in like the other layers, then none of us deal with government budgets and write policy. So whereas we all do live in a community, and we can all, as far as I know, we all vote on how the institution proceeds and like acts on our behalf. Let's say like the delegation of responsibility and authority, like those are things that we should speak to, certainly. But when we start stepping out of our understanding of, for example, just that argument about government efficiency and how every individual in a community then has to expend additional resources for the sake of removing a persistent threat, then that's an
Well,
entirely different conversation.
yeah. So I think just to kind of clean up the rest of the discussion, let's not go to the aspects of, the costs. But I think one thing that we do need to keep in mind, even when we're kind of talking about at this abstract level, is that, we're talking about human lives, and Tilting Windmill made a comment. We're talking about a living person with parents, children, brother, and sisters. The state never has the right to kill its own. And this does kind of hark back to the practical aspect that you can't perfectly execute justice. It's not. I don't think it's fruitful to have a discussion where we just assume that a guilty person definitely is guilty, and that there's no possibility that this person, should or should not be killed, or is guilty or not guilty, and that you would completely discount things like the Innocence Project and all the other past injustices, right? So I don't think we should take that out. I agree we can take the costs out, but we should definitely keep in mind that we don't have perfect knowledge. And I don't know if you saw Minority Report, but it was talking about even with that kind of
Which is
perfect
coming, by the way.
precognition,
Yeah.
right? Even that can have failures. So let's then, for the rest of the discussion, let's kind of keep it in terms of practical aspects, but still keep in mind that there is a practical aspect of application of justice. So that being said, Joe, did you have any comments that you want to add in?
Oh,
Joe,
you're
you're
on mute.
muted. Joe, you're muted.
Sorry.
No worries.
That last point that you made reminded me of one of the reasons that it costs more to put somebody to death than to not is because the system is imperfect, but you don't want to err in this case. So, the way the legal system goes, pretty much any excuse that, a criminal has that's plausible, should be reviewed because you don't want to make a mistake. And that kind of fuels. So I guess what I'm saying is I'm not sure how you're going to take away the high cost of just having the death penalty, not even actually putting people to death, because there are a lot of people who are, on death row, but they're probably not going to be put to death. But still, it's costly. So just the having of the death penalty itself seems, very prohibitive. And then the only other thing I want to say is when I look at, I sort of study serial killers. I'm kind of obsessed with people that do things I could never imagine myself doing, or wanting to do. What is it that, this kind of, especially if it's a level of evil, I think it's just interesting. What could possibly compel somebody to do something when you look at some of these crimes, but the thing is, there are answers to the questions, like how could somebody do that? In almost all the cases, it seems to me that when people kill another person, it's a form of vengeance. It's a form of revenge, not on that person always. You know, maybe they look like your parent. Serial killers, a lot of serial killers will murder, have had horrible lives. They put blame on their mothers often,
Sure.
even though the fathers are usually the ones who administer the punishment and
Yeah.
the brutality.
Yeah. Mom didn't protect them. That's the.
Yeah, and a lot of that is below the surface. They don't realize that they're blaming their mother.
Sure.
But then they take down on other women later on in life. So I guess what I would ask you is there's that element of revenge that's in killing itself, I think, is just kind of carried over at the state level in the case of capital punishment. You know,
Yeah.
maybe we could end end crime or something. Yeah. Anyway, you know what I mean. I think you get a sense of it.
I think you and Q are both addressing the underlying idea of the intrinsic value of life. Or like, would that be like at least one of the points would be something like the intrinsic value of life? Do I have that right, Q?
I mean, in a sense, but I think the primary point was that Joe's comment really comes down to we really can't divorce cost from this discussion because the cost is the determination of whether we are making the right choice. That's why it's expensive. Not necessarily because
I would say that's one that might be a consideration in one version of the conversation, but I think there are like at least three conversations to be had, which would be one. So Joe brought up that there seems to be an element of vengeance in killing, and maybe in all killing. I'm not sure if I captured that properly, but it seemed like there's an idea of that there might be an element of vengeance and all, which you could say that in the idea of. And so I'll give you kind of like my understanding of justice just through my experience, is that, and obviously thought and research and all that, but justice is thought to be in many communities retribution, like a form of retribution. And I would say that that's, while that may be true, like maybe in some communities they may think of it that way, but retribution is intended in justice to be one form of what would be considered rehabilitation, and then that's
rehabilitation or restoration.
Well, I would say retribution is the idea of the retribution, right? So punishing. So you could use like spanking or putting in prison. So prison would almost be both, an idea of both, and where you're both removing them from the community and then giving them an opportunity to rehabilitate, and then re-enter the community as a reformed individual. So the idea, and that's ultimately why like California changed the name of there's institute or their institution from the California Department of Corrections to California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation, because that is the idea of that methodology or that mechanism. But yeah, I would say that sure, in all forms of killing, you say, well, so that would be the state, and then just like ask. So I would ask this question, or I would like present this as an idea. Is that sure, but let's take the state down to what it is or what it's supposed to be, which the state is really just a third party that was created as a form of institution that was created like early on. It's like a mediator. So it's really there to ensure fairness. And then we come up with the idea of justice after that. All right, because we now have a mediator, so they have the responsibility and authority. And then we say, well, should the state be able to exact the death penalty as a form of justice? It's like, well, the state was originally intended to be a neutral party to determine fairness. And so vengeance coming from the victim versus retribution coming as a form of restoration or not restoration, but rehabilitation. And then asking the question, are there behaviors that would extend beyond the possibility of rehabilitation? And I would say that there are. Sorry, that was long-winded. I hope that made sense.
I guess I was speaking more to like the when I was bringing up the serial killers, I was thinking of a lot of these people, and you probably know this very well from your experience. They live in a cycle of violence. I mean, their fathers were violent, their fathers' fathers were violent, and so on. And I mean, here's one way to think of it. We spend for somebody in prison, what, 60,000 maybe in some states, 40,000 probably would be the lowest possible, somewhere in that range. If we did invest the money, I mean, part of the issue is like Clarence Darrow thought, crime too has a cause, and you treat it like it's a disease, and then look at what the cause is. And well, if you look at the numbers, a lot of the cause is mental illness, drug use, and poverty are the three biggest factors in terms of
definitely the root causes. I'd say you could maybe even take it down a layer below that, but I agree. Yeah, those are for sure true statements.
I mean, so one thing is that a lot of these people, you could just look at the worst criminals, and the worse they are, they have mitigating circumstances in their history. They've probably been, there are three key things: mental illness, head injury, which might or might not be related to mental illness.
And then, for sure.
Abuse is the sort of third factor. And of course, not everybody who has those three factors goes on to become a serial killer, of course. But the thing is, there are these kinds of causal factors, and they're causal factors that have some kind of mitigating effect on, if you tell people about these factors, they start to feel, oh, well, maybe this guy is not entirely at fault. And which complicates the story too. So it just seems like, first of all, you've got this cycle of violence that's fueled by retribution. And I see capital punishment kind of fueling in there, but then there could be a more positive way of approaching criminality where, I mean, almost, figuring out what the factors are that put people in jail in the first place and trying to eliminate those factors. I mean, that.
So, Joe, I think we're moving, kind of drifting.
But obviously, we have the money, Anyway, those
Joe,
are.
I think we're drifting a little bit away from the ethics of the death penalty, because I think presumably those kind of factors, mitigating factors, etc., would come into play during a trial, right? Or during the assessment of whether this person should be put to death or not. But I think if we kind of go down into the crux of the discussion of kind of, sort of the moral aspect of the death penalty, and kind of, I don't know, I think, Charles, maybe you don't necessarily want to get into the moral aspect, but just in regard to kind of what this societal responsibilities are in meeting out the death penalty.
I could bring what Joe said into this way.
Okay.
In this part of the discussion, because I think because what he's talking about is like, well, what about rehabilitating? Like, rehabilitation should be a consideration. Did I capture that idea? So so that was, and I think that's like ultimately, before we ever get to the idea of alternative forms of justice, I'm going to say punishment, but I don't want to say punishment because I need to think about that word before I use it. But rehabilitation in these contexts. So the idea of the serial killer, the idea, like, so I know this from experience because like this is my area of expertise, is like understanding how people become who they are and how behaviors manifest from values and paradigms and all that stuff. So I would say that's like, yes, you can rewire certain areas. You can rewire people's brains by asking questions, like simply by asking questions. It takes years, and I've done it. I've done it with people who have bipolar disorder. I've done it with people who have borderline personality disorder. I've worked literally with a clinical psychologist who uses my book in his practice now to do that. And you can do those things. But the question that is pending, and I think is, I think that ultimately, like the science will prove this out, is that you cannot overwrite emotional appraisals. So one of the ways that the memory stores, like one processes and decides to store what's important, is through what is emotionally relevant. And the way that emotions arise is through future prediction modeling. And so, and I know we're getting super deep, but I told you in the last episode that I would bring in the neuroscience. So when we begin to future model what's going to happen, our brains determine what the worst possible outcome is, what the most likely outcome is, or most probable, and then what the most desirable outcome is. So those three things happen. And then based on the most probable, our bodies, our mind, our brains start releasing neurochemicals, neurotransmitters, and neurochemicals, and start preparing our body for that to actually happen. And so when we've engaged a behavior, like this isn't just one behavior, this is how all addiction works, like non-physical addiction, where it's all cognitive. When we engage a behavior that our brains interpret as being positive, like a positive outcome, then any future even consideration, imagination of that thing gives us the dopamine hit. And this, like, I think Andrew Huberman has a great, he talks about this on impact theory. So it's known. He's like a world-renowned neuroscientist. But what neuroscience has shown is that, okay, well, what happens is your brain drops the dopamine to move you towards action. And so if that's true, so if all these things are true, that your future prediction modeling and that you've now associated, let's just use murder because it's the easiest one. But let's use murder. You murdered someone, you got a thrill, it gave you the dopamine hit, and it gave you all the good feelings, right? All the adrenaline, the rush, the excitement. And now you've associated those feelings. Your brain can never be unwired from that. That will always be part of your semantic memory. So when we talk about like, can rehabilitation work? My assessment in regards to that specific question is that you can never, or in the context of the public trust, like you will never be able to restore the public trust by allowing a child molester to exist in the public, because one, that you can't rehabilitate them. You can't make it so that you might be able to make it so they don't ever engage that behavior. But what you can't do is you can't stop their brain from giving them all those good feelings every time they think about touching a kid. And
Yeah,
so,
but now you're making an argument for
Thought crime.
basically protecting the society.
which is, well, that was the basis of my entire argument in the beginning.
But was it because you went a long way along talking about how it costs and the cost impact of it?
Sure.
But just locking someone away achieves the exact outcome of keeping them from society. You're not getting a benefit
I don't know that I agree with
by
that.
executing them. They aren't out in society. They can't go and do these crimes anymore. Problem solved. They're not going anywhere.
Yeah,
it's just vengeance beyond that.
I'll tell you why I don't
And
agree
also
with
just
that.
let me just
Again,
add one thing, right?
sure.
You're making the argument that they're wired that way, right?
I'm
Or
making the
they
argument
became
that
wired that way.
they become wired that
I'm
way.
granting it.
Yeah, they
I'm
become wired
granting
that
that the
way.
person. I'm granting that the person is wired that way and can
Sure.
never be redeemed.
Sure.
Let's just assume that's 100% correct.
Sure.
It still never ever gets you to the answer that you've got, Charles, because
Yeah,
it
we can
always
have that
costs
discussion.
more. Yeah,
Sure.
but that is the only discussion that needs to happen.
I don't agree.
We can grant all of your assumptions to get to that point, but you're still left with the fact that in the real world, the death penalty costs much more. Even in Texas, where the death penalty is much easier to achieve than anywhere else in the United States, it still costs 3 times more to keep a person in, or to put a person to death than it does to keep them for the rest of their life. So you never ever achieve the outcome that you're achieving. It doesn't reduce crime. Where's the benefit?
Sure. So you made the statement that it's the only discussion. So if we assume that all that's true, then we move into this. We say, okay, well, let's assess costs. Now, again, I don't use the term. I don't want to use the term money because money is built on. It's an idea that's built on top of what it represents. So
yes, but money is a way to measure things. That's how it's done in risk analysis.
I agree with that only if we talk about it in the context of what it represents. But I want to go a different direction first. And that's this. You say removing this person from the community and putting them into a prison removes that threat. And I would say that there's at least an argument to be made. Now, remember, I worked in law enforcement for years. One of the places that I worked was the jail. And so I would at least offer that I have some credibility in having this discussion. Having a person locked in a facility having to be managed by other people within a community is at a bare minimum a level of influence on the people that are having to do that work. And so, and there's no argument to be made that, I mean, unless you want to make one, and then we can have that discussion too, in which case I promise you're not going to like the outcome of that because I can speak from personal experience and it's not anecdotal. That has a direct influence on the community because the people that uphold the justice have to be influenced and manage those people. So while you may think that there's only a monetary cost, I would say that the cost is significantly higher. And yes, we do house these people to keep them out of the community, but all of the actual effort that goes into ensuring that those things happen have a dramatic impact on the community. And that has to do a lot with the people that you put in charge of having to keep them from there. So these people don't just go away. There's an entire,
Charles,
there's an entire mechanism to do that.
Of the whole prison population, how many of them are death row inmates?
I don't know. I couldn't answer.
I mean, it's got to be a fairly small percentage, right? It's not. I can't even imagine it's 10%.
It's not,
considering how big.
It's not even 0.1%.
Yeah,
what's it, about
right.
3 million people in America in jail.
Sure.
I think it's something around that 1% of, actually about 2.5 million because it's about 1% of the adult population.
Well, I think the challenge.
So right now,
10,000 on death row, maybe something like that. It's a tiny fragment.
I think the challenge with that.
By the way, so just googling the question, how many people are on death row?
Yeah.
As of January 1st, 2024, there were 2,227 people on death row in the United States.
There it is.
Sure.
So it's not even 0.01%.
Sure. Well, so I think so. I mean, again, you're just expanding the topic of discussion because.
Well, no. So my point was that when you say that it has a actual impact on the people who are keeping the prison,
sure,
vast majority of them are going to be there regardless of whether we have the death penalty or not, or whether we have life imprisonment, death penalty or not.
So this is why I'm saying that you're expanding the discussion, because when we get to this point, so now you're making a claim about which you're obviously, we can operate on the idea that what John said is true, that it's a very small percentage. Then what I'm going to bring back around is the idea of self-organizing systems, which is that may be true within the current context. So one, there in a culture where my ideology is the prevailing ideology, right? Where we say that removing these people from community permanently, like let's for a moment just take the concept that the death penalty is the way that we handle people convicted of murder, rape, child molestation, sexual crimes. Let's just take that and hold that idea for a second. Then if that's true, then it's no longer 1%, because now everyone who's in prison, whether it was they got the death penalty now, or they didn't get the death penalty, but they either pled out or just simply got sentenced with a lower sentence. In a world where, like in an idea where that is the prevailing ideology, it wouldn't be 1%. So yeah, that's where I say, like, well, that may be true, but that's also a cultural thing coming from the idea that we don't want to engage the death penalty, and that's fine. That's fine. But when we're talking about the ethics of it and the reason why I think that it should be considered an option, it's because you cannot restore the public trust with these people in the community. And I don't think that it makes sense. To me, you could use exile as an option too.
So, Charles, let me
sorry,
just.
Charles, you keep making that claim, but you're not ever putting any. You keep making this claim that it's not restoring any. It doesn't meet what the community wants. What the community wants changes over time, and you aren't putting any data on the table to say that your claim is true. You just keep saying it as though it's a real thing, not demonstrating that it actually is a real thing.
What the community wants does not change over time. That's not true.
Oh, yes, it does.
Bollocks.
So people wanted wanted slavery. Community wanted slavery 2,000 years ago.
Sure.
Community wanted slavery 300 years ago. Does community want slavery now?
Well, I think you're operating on some base assumptions that might be faulty, but I would say
it's a
that
simple question.
Well, I would say that one only. So to address specifically what you said, I would say this: that a part of community wanted slavery, and today I would say that yes, a part of community does want slavery, and I would also say that the underlying reasons why people wanted slavery still exist, and I would say that the core function of civilization at the bare root is the safety of the family unit, and that will never change, because
And how does slavery make that? How does slavery achieve that?
How does slavery achieve that? We could walk the dog on that if you want to.
Well, okay. So here's my
It's
concern
great
about
if you're
what I'm
the
hearing.
It's great if you're the family that owns the slave. Not great if you're the family that is the slave.
Well, listen. Number one, I'm not a proponent of slavery in any form or fashion, and I'm not saying that to virtue signal.
You claim that what society wants never changes, and that is demonstrably garbage. Sorry, but it's just not true at all.
I think part of my concern of what I'm hearing, Charles, is that when you said that what the society wants doesn't change over time, and we came up with this example, and the immediate response was to kind of move the goalpost, that it wasn't what the society wanted. Then it became the underlying concerns of what the society wanted doesn't change over time. So it seems like there's kind of a shifting goalpost in response to pushback on your claim that what society doesn't want, or what society wants over time doesn't change. And what I'm still looking for.
Can I address that?
Yeah, sure.
So I would say that no, I'm operating on a core set of principles. They may not be immediately relevant to you, or I mean, not relevant, but viewable. Or you may not understand what those core set of principles are.
Okay.
But I'm happy to explain them.
Yeah, what is the core value that advocates for the death penalty?
Well, let's go back to the question about what I said, which was that what society wants doesn't change. So,
okay, what core value of society that doesn't change wants the death penalty?
So that's going to go back to what I said originally about the conscious awareness of why your neighbor doesn't kill you and take all of your things. Because of what it is that civilization, not in the population of 500,000, the abstract idea of being born into a context, but how civilization happens in the first place, how it is that you even got to the ideas you have now, is the glue that holds civilization together. So there's no father out there. No, like maybe barring mental health concerns, that's going to tell you, I want my community to be more dangerous for my children. They're never going to say that. They're always going to say, I want my children to have a better life than I do, or I at least want to die knowing that the community that I leave my children to is safe.
Right.
And then all of the argument on top of that changes is the meaning of what it means to be safe.
Right, but in that changing of that meaning, doesn't that mean that the core value shifts with it? The metric that we decide what makes something more safe or a better life, that metric changes over time.
I would say that the semantic understanding changes, but not the core value. The core value never changes, which is that you don't want to die and you don't want your kids to die. That's the core value. It's completely like it's to say otherwise would be a rejection of the idea that humans are animals.
So this idea that we don't want to die, it almost seems like sometimes we're talking about terms that can kind of fluctuate between vague and concise.
Sure.
As the conversation flows, rather than sticking to a specific definition, which is kind of goes back to what I said a minute ago, which is that it kind of seems like the goalposts sort of shift depending on where we are in the conversation.
Okay. Help me understand. And I can.
Okay. So you said that the core values, like we want our children to have a better life. So sure. What does it mean to have a better life? Does it mean that we're able to plow the field in one day rather than two? Well, that's a better life. Or they go off to the city to become a lawyer rather than a farmer. That's a better life. To say better is such a vague term that can mean whatever we want it to mean. And we're still...
Yeah, I don't agree with that. I don't want to say I don't agree with that, but I would say that you're multiple layers of meaning on top of the core.
But again, since we can't really even get to what the core meaning of better means in the context, other than just I'm alive today and I'm alive tomorrow and so are my kids. If that, okay, we've now made the term better so vague as to be almost meaningless.
Well, so I would just say that we haven't hashed out that conversation, but we could if you wanted to.
Well, yeah, because again, at the core of your premise of what is your framework for supporting the death penalty is this idea that it creates a better society. And if you haven't established what you even mean by better, then we don't even have the scaffolding to hold up your argument.
I would say that maybe I thought that I felt that we had, but I mean, if we wanted to say what's better, it's going to be what's like the very, very first thing I said is how we, because someone asked me the question about what do I define as good, right? And so we could use those terms interchangeably. Is that like it would just be more of what's good, right? Better would be more of what is good. Can we agree on that?
Sure. Again, I think we're talking we're talking about sort of concepts that are
vague. That's not really, because we've just kicked the can down the road from what is bad. What's good
I'll just go back to what I said.
A word, and now we've just go, well, we'll have more of what is good. Now we've got to define that new word as well.
Well, if we go back and you can go back in the recording later, but I'll say it again, which is I defined, because you asked me what do I define as good, and I said what I defined as good is anything that promotes the future of the community and safety in the community, basically whatever improves the probability that community continues and maintains the public trust. That's what I define as good. So, so better would be more of that.
It's that issue with the public trust claim that that doesn't demonstrate that it actually achieves any improvement in public trust, whether the death penalty is being used or not. How is the public trust served when a person is found to have been executed after they were innocent?
Well, so I can explain my idea of the answer to your question, which is this. When I say the public trust, I'm talking about the trust that exists between the individuals within the community. And what you're saying, in my opinion, like what you're identifying there is more of an idea of the individual's trust against the institution that is intended to deconflict and normalize that civilization. So I would say that trust is lost, right? So when those things happen, trust is lost towards the institution.
But trust is also lost when an innocent person is put in jail and then executed.
Like, I agree with that.
Yes,
yeah.
it's great to if you could be sure that every time you put a person in jail and executed them, that person was guilty. That's great, but there is no greater loss of public trust than the death, than the execution of an innocent person.
I don't know that I would agree with that.
You can never undo that.
I wouldn't. I don't know that I would. So if you wanted to say like if there's no greater loss of the public trust towards the institution than that, I would say that you could make that argument. I that may be true. There's a high probability
Charles,
that that's true.
I still don't understand the difference that you're talking about. The public trust against the institution versus what to each other, the rest of the population.
Correct. Well, that's what you so in this context, you have to separate the idea of the institution from the individuals that actually make up the community, because the people that make up the community are completely independent of the institution. The institution is what is formed as a function of people coming together. It doesn't bring people together.
So I've been trying to struggle with a way of phrasing this question that doesn't come across as giving it less seriousness than it deserves, but I'm just going to kind of phrase it the way that I've put it into the comments section. How are you not arguing that we start from a spherical chicken in a vacuum?
All right, say that again.
A spherical chicken in a vacuum. It's the idea of, a physicist is asked, why did the chicken cross the road? And he responds with, okay, I have the answer. But first you have to start with a spherical chicken in a vacuum. It's this idea that you've got something so philosophically divorced from reality that as to be meaningless as a starting point. You have to have some connection to the real world as that first domino, don't you?
Well, I would say that we're talking
otherwise you're arguing for an ideal. Cool. I mean, I love arguing for ideals, but if you don't have them connected to anything real, you have nowhere to start. You have no scaffolding to hold up your argument.
So I understand what you're saying, and here's my response to that: is this like what you're identifying is the fundamental problem with having these types of discussions from completely different frameworks. So like this is the entire reason why there is a right and a left or a middle. Like we're talking about completely different frameworks, and the answer to the actual answer to that problem is how we assess risk. Everything comes down to how the human brain assesses risk.
Okay. I mean, I would agree with you on that. I
agree entirely as well.
I'm sorry, what was that?
I 100% agree that we assess risk quite differently across people. Let me just put my professional hat on as a person who has written risk policies for large organizations, and make the point that humans are terrible at assessing risk. We are absolutely appalling. We're really, really great at assessing the type of risk which will keep you from getting eaten by a lion,
Yes.
while
Maybe,
traveling
yeah.
across the plains. That
Sure.
is a great type. We're optimized for that type of risk, but the other types of risk where our brain does not do a good job at that. So as a result, there needs to be really detailed and very, very careful work on how you assess risk, and your gut feel can't be sort of allowed to sort of come into that, because it'll steer us off the wrong path. Let me give you an example.
There are studies that say that you're right. So it's not.
Yeah.
They're more about statistical analysis, but yeah, that's risk is a statistical analysis, risk assessment.
Yeah, so I did a risk assessment for the replacement. So I worked for a large electrical infrastructure company, and there was a project in order to replace a couple of circuit breakers at a substation, and these circuit breakers had been identified that on occasions they will explode like a bomb and shower everything inside the substation with razor sharp fragments of porcelain, and anyone near it their chance of surviving is not high. So that was the project. We'll get out and replace those circuit breakers. When the risk assessment was done, and you go along and put the dollars in, and I used a pretty sizable dollar for the loss of the human life, in the vicinity of 33 million Australian dollars. Based upon a couple of different factors that was used in that. I won't go into it. But when you look at the actual risk that they represented, it came down to an annualized risk of $11 per year, is what the cost, the risk of those exploding, could kill you in an instant bombs, and the cost. And it was somewhere in the vicinity of $45,000 worth of risk just to drive out and have a look at the thing. So it just made no sense to replace them.
Sure.
And this is the sort of terrible risk assessment methodology. So yeah, people are terrible at people assess risk differently, but from the left political spectrum to the right political spectrum, but you're not. It doesn't sort of change the underlying actual risks, and so relying
for
upon
sure.
a person's gut feeling is not a good way to go.
No, so we agree on the idea that there's an objective reality and that we all live in some distant reality or some distance from that. Does that sounds like what you're close to what you're saying?
Yeah. Oh, that is most certainly true.
So like in that I'm comfortable with, and so I think like ultimately this comes down to in terms of like the higher levels, like, well, someone is saying, hey, I would rather err on the side of caution and say, I want no innocent person to be killed on behalf of the state, which is me, right? No, on behalf of me. That's ultimately what the state represents. I want no person to be killed, no innocent person to be killed. And so I'm willing to pay the price, since we're going back to resources, the cost, whatever that cost may be, to ensure that they're removed from society in all reasonable ways of thinking about it, or divorced from society, and they're no longer a threat to us. I will pay the cost for that, but they're kept alive in case of the instance in which they could be proven innocent. And so that's, if I'm understanding correctly, like that's everybody's argument against the idea that, and here at least, that the idea that the death penalty is worth using, which I think worth is an important terminology to use in that statement, versus what I'm saying, which is I think that it's a reasonable, sorry, was that?
I'd say it's only about 10% of my argument. The other part of the argument is the fact that the death penalty is demonstrably more expensive than not doing the death penalty. So it doesn't achieve any of the goals you set out for it. Except for
You,
perhaps
you're making an
the one
argument.
about,
Yeah.
except for perhaps the one that you were making about the public trust, but you haven't managed to demonstrate that the public trust is actually achieved by the death penalty more than the public trust would be eroded by killing an innocent person. So that is left as an undemonstrated point. So where are we left?
So yeah, so you're coming back to the idea or the question that is, and the challenge I have with these questions, and not that there's anything wrong with asking that question. It's just that like we're sitting in a live on YouTube. So before, like, we would have to actually go do that research and see, number one, if there's already been a study, but two, like how that would be. If there wasn't, then we would have to come up with a way
for public trust, or study for cost?
For like, I think we dealt with the cost. You're talking about the public trust, like
Okay.
the sense of safety, right? And then how that is influencing the culture. So, I mean, we could we'd have to bring in sociologists into that study, which we could, and then do all the measurements, which would be very interesting. It would be very interesting to do that, which is how do you feel about the community? Well, I can tell you this, anecdotal, but in California, we are witnessing we have witnessed now the outcomes of an ideology that leans more into less punishment for certain types of crimes versus more. And again, I'm saying it's anecdotal, so it is not but you could look at it through the lens of, well, the community just overwhelmingly voted for a reinstatement of laws that just a few years ago they voted to reduce the punishment on, and it's because, at least the assumption is, that they feel significantly less safe. So,
and that just brings us back to people being unable to understand where risk actually is, and a current,
I don't know. I would say this.
Push.
I would say this.
We've already established that people are terrible at evaluating risk.
I agree, but I think you might agree with this assessment. There is, I would say, I would make this argument. There is 100% chance that by people feeling less safe in a community, whether it's rational or not, you are increasing the probability that of civilizational collapse. So where people have fear and don't feel like they are safe or their children are safe, then you are increasing the risk.
Okay. So Charles,
yeah.
you had talked about, bringing sociologists and all that. You just made a huge claim that, I mean, I'm never sure where to start with that.
Go ahead. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, what do you got? Go ahead. Sorry, what was the claim?
Oh, that the civilization is going to end because we don't do death penalty.
No. I said it increases the probability of that.
Here's my biggest concern with regard to the death penalty. Even if I grant you that the death penalty is more cost effective, I don't agree with that point, but let's say that it does.
Sure.
And even if we say that somehow it makes society safer, we have no evidence to support that claim. But even if I accept that premise, I still have a hard time backing any kind of a program where if we kill somebody and then we find out we got it wrong, we can't take that back.
Sure.
If I lock somebody up for 15, 20 years for a crime they didn't commit, they can get an official apology. They can get their record expunged. We can throw a great big wad of cash at them to try to get their lives back on track. We can do things to make that right.
Sure.
But the death penalty is the one thing where if we get it wrong, we have no eraser. We have no course correction.
And let me just insert Neo's question here.
I think that's where we need to land. Is what you just said is that, in my opinion, that's where the discussion should go, is right to that question. And then Now, because at that point, that's binary. Now we can actually go vote on whether we agree or disagree about that specific topic. It just,
Okay.
in my opinion.
Okay, so how do we then? So how do you arrest? Let me try that again. Because ironically, it would appear that you do have the strength of your convictions. So had to get that in there.
That's okay.
Hey, are all prisoner jokes inside jokes? Okay.
It's good.
Okay,
Uh,
wait. So
thank you.
let me
All right,
just
cool.
stop.
No,
So-
no. Sorry, I had to
Wait,
get that.
wait.
I was holding those into the entire conversation. So now to get back.
So
to
John, I think you're kind of making the case for the death penalty. So
no.
I think,
let
yeah.
me just ask Neo's question here. So his question is, how many innocents would you be willing to kill for, essentially allow for the death penalty to be
And then
instituted?
I have a follow up. I have a follow up question.
So that is a great question. How many innocents is Charles willing to kill? And I think that that question does deal with the fact that the state represents us, right? It represents us. And so if the state is killing anybody at all, it's on behalf of the people. And so ultimately that's what I said earlier, which is that's how we weigh risk. I came on here because I believe that the death penalty is good and it should be used for people who are not rehabilitatable. Like, I don't know what the right word is. I don't think rehabilitate.
Unfixable.
You cannot rehabilitate. I'll say that.
Rehabilitatable.
I'm not sure it's a word, but that's what comes to
Unfixable?
mind. People who cannot be rehabilitated. I think that is the right answer for those people, and I think it's and so to answer your question, how many innocents? It's like, well, unfortunately, in that circumstance, in my position, and I understand that like this is not the consensus, which I of course I would prefer like us all to come to a consensus, and I'm sure we could if this was a roundtable about how we should actually proceed versus just a forum for discussion of ideas. I'm sure that we would find a way to come to consensus, because I would probably lean just a little further towards your guys' ideology, or at least make concessions there. But to answer Neil's question, it's whatever's necessary.
Okay, would you be willing to be one of those people?
If I had to, yeah.
Okay, well, I mean, I'll at least give you credit for applying the standard to yourself. I disagree. But
sure. Well,
but I will at least give credit. That is the most intellectually consistent and honest answer I've heard out of that response in a while. So I credit where it's due on that.
I served as a soldier and a cop, so the idea of death is with me every day. But to die falsely accused of something. Well, I would fight, right? I'm a fighter for sure.
Yeah.
So I would fight against it. But the idea is like, would you apply the principle to yourself? And absolutely, I would.
Okay.
If it was so I think that just to give you like a little tool, I think the question is what the more like, if you really want to get to the bottom of it, ask that about someone's kid, because that's really what changes the probabilities there. But
well, I'm going to avoid taking the cheap shot, but
yeah, no, it's fine. I just because that would really make me think about it a little deeper, maybe. But
it's the trolley problem. Would you throw the switch to kill the one innocent person who's asleep on the rails if it was your kid?
Mm-hmm.
We're talking about the trolley problem now.
So yeah, I would absolutely kill the other 6 people and save my kid 100% every time, without like even a hesitation.
But doesn't that make the morality situational?
Well, so I would love to have that discussion, because I think that, and again, I know that you guys are like, this is typically the ending point, but if you guys want to have a discussion about morality, and also to cue what we talked about earlier, the intrinsic value of human life, 100%, we can do another One
Yeah,
of these.
I think the question of objective and subjective morality comes up a lot, and I've been meaning to make a video on that, but that might be something that we can talk about. And yeah, and we are kind of at the ending point. I do want to give Joe, because he's been kind of listening in and just
Yeah, Joe, you got to
absorbing.
let someone
So,
else get a word in edgewise, man.
so I want to, if you have anything you wanted to add before we end.
I just wanted to ask one quick question, because it seems to me, I mean, it hasn't been mentioned yet, and this very much ties in with the idea of morality and all these other questions. But if I understand your arguments correctly, Charles, it wouldn't just stop with murderers. Like, you'd have the same reason to put to death.
Thank you, Joe. Yes.
Even if they don't kill them, because you can't cure them. It's incurable, or at least some people claim that. And so
there would be. I could tell you the ones that are
you
easily.
Agree. I'm really just asking if that's an affirmation on your part. You're fine with that, because it seems like you are kind of fine with it, given your argument.
So I can give you like a pretty, without really like digging in, I can give you an answer to that question. So it would be something along the lines of murder, rape, child molestation, or child rape, or any harm, so any of those types of things. Those would be behaviors that, obviously murder is nuanced, because you can talk about like crimes of passion and things like that. But yeah, murder, rape, child molestation, and then if you wanted to go deeper, we could have a discussion about like repeated, right? So like, again, non-rehabilitated people, like people who just cannot be rehabilitated. That can also be applied to number of times that you go through the rehabilitation. So again, I think it's systemic. I believe in self-organizing systems, and I don't think that humanity is any different than a self-organizing system. I think our psychology is self-organizing from the way that I understand that, all of that, and consciousness and all that. So yeah, I don't have, to me, the purpose of civilization. The cause of civilization is an agreement. So a form of the social contract. And I believe that people can divorce themselves from the social contract, and that's how we get tribalism. And I think that the underlying mechanisms of civilization are trust, and anything that's going to just put in harm's way the idea of a society or civilization, I consider that evil. So, and this is why, because, and I'll just use my own life as an example. I have children, and there's not a single human in this world that's more important than my child to me. I can think about it in the abstract, right, in the 20,000 foot view, and say humanity is also important as a construct, as a concept. But when it comes to me, and the reason that I live in civilization, and and we work together, like, is in that form of agreement and towards the trust. So that is kind of the underlying foundation. We can get into the intrinsic value of humanity, of life, later, Q, if you want to do that. I have an entire model for objective and subjective morality, and I can explain how, from psychology and neuroscience, those can be considered objective and subjective. And so, yeah, does that answer your question, Joe? Like, yes, it 100% would go outside of murder, 100%.
Yeah.
Probably like child molesters would absolutely be one of those.
I'm not saying I agree, but it does answer my question.
Sure, yeah. 100%.
I mean,
that's okay.
I think yeah. The sense in which, well, I don't know. It's interesting. I think all these other questions about morality that are kind of hovering around that I don't want to bring up because I'll be here forever, they become interesting, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, I wish we could come to like I can understand. I don't think that everything that I think is perfect or 100% right. I have a framework I operate on, and I think that I expose myself to these discussions so that I can get better ideas, and hopefully, so to some of the people listening, there was at least some other considerations that maybe they hadn't thought about. But ultimately, I appreciate you bringing me on, Q, and everyone else for engaging, and it's fun.
And
Yeah.
I would like to just for my own uh, sake, I do want to say that again, I disagree with a lot of what you're saying, but I do want to give you credit for being intellectually consistent.
Well, thanks.
I spend a lot of time in the comment section in Twitter, and intellectual consistency is a very rare commodity there.
Yeah, I wish I could say that I was always consistent. I don't know, right? That's the idea of expressing ideas, right? Is to find the flaws. So,
Sure. And I would very much enjoy a conversation with you on subjective versus objective morality.
that's my favorite
I
thing.
think that'd be a good topic.
Yeah.
By the way,
yeah.
it's interesting in the Twitter and like Joe, Charles, we are definitely a little more aggressive, right, on the Twitter posts.
Yeah, my ego slips out every once in a while. Yeah, every once in a while. I try to keep that little guy trapped in there, but
Yeah.
Oh,
Hey, Joe, are you on Blue Sky? I presume you're not, right, Joe?
I am on Blue Sky. I for some reason I can never get anybody to follow me on Blue Sky. I can't get conversations going or anything.
Yeah.
And
I mean,
every
I think
time
that's the
go there, I just
biggest.
have all these women that are probably robots, like who are contacting me and like
No, but they
No.
said they love me.
But I was look, that prince needs my help.
he needs your money. Hey, so quick little side note since we're here.
How
You
else
guys are
is
all
how
Go
else
ahead.
is he going to get the money out of Africa?
So little side. Anyone who's listening that's on X and wants followers, I found the secret, or at least one of the secrets, like a couple days ago, and that's by reposting, quoting someone, and then adding text to their whatever it is they post. You increase your followership significantly. So it happens a lot faster. So just a little trick I learned. I try to crack all the codes because I own a marketing agency. So
Yeah, you have to requote the right person though.
True.
Right.
This is true.
So,
Yeah.
which is a trick. But I've been on kind of Elon's little jail for like most of this month, where
Oh no.
so my impressions were like at 120,000 at like right at the end of the year, and then it went down to like a few thousand a day. So
Yeah,
anyway, yeah. So we'll kind of end it here, and this was a really great discussion. I appreciate everyone just being calm and civil, despite this being a very divisive topic. I know that Ook was kind of champing at the bits a little bit, but
sorry.
he was being very nice. But maybe next time, Ook, when Charles is on a third time, you can kind
I'll
of let
play
him have
next
it.
time. Yeah.
Yeah, and stay away from
Charles,
the
you're
bloody
gonna have
cat.
to. Yeah, you're gonna have to come on with some kind of shield on when Ook starts.
Well,
But,
I brought ice cream just in case the emotions got high. I'm an emotional eater.
and thanks, Joe, for coming on. I know you had kind of a busy day, but
it was interesting.
Yeah, thanks, Joe.
yeah,
Fun.
and I think as we get into the discussions on morality, I think that'll be kind of more in your wheelhouse, and it'll definitely be interesting to hear from you. And the rest of the panel, and thanks for Steve-O and Neil for kind of making room for our guests. So I appreciate that.
Yeah.
And thanks very much to everyone on the chats. Crystal definitely had a lot of opinions. So Charles, if you want to like rewatch this and go through her comments, it might be interesting. Yeah. In the live chats. But yeah, it's always great having people in live chats participating. So all right, so we'll end it here. And again, thanks everyone, and we will see you in the comments.
Bye all.